Hello and welcome once again to The Booking Club, the podcast that brings you today's leading authors and commentators from a table at their favourite places to eat and drink. I'm your host, Jack Haldane, and on this episode I'm going to be speaking to screenwriter and novelist John Niven at Scott's in Mayfair about his 11th novel, The Fathers. I've never been to Scott's seafood restaurant in Mayfair, but I'm very pleased that my next guest has chosen it since I've had it on my radar for many years, and it's a beautiful evening to be here, actually, sat outside on the terrace. My next guest is the screenwriter and novelist John Niven, with whom I'll be talking about his 11th novel, The Fathers. John, it's great to have you here.
It's good to be here, Jack. Thank you. Always nice to be at Scott's.
And you're a regular here?
I wouldn't go that far. Not the cheapest place to be chowing down every night, but probably more than I should, to be fair.
Well, to be fair, I was inside earlier and I was saying to somebody, I think the author's quite familiar with this place. And they said something, they mumbled something like, yeah, he was here, no, which made it sound like you had been here just the night before.
I know.
When was the last time you...
A couple of weeks ago. I like lovely Sean's on tonight, who works the door there.
Yeah, Sean the doorman.
Sean's great.
Also, is he also a Scot?
Yeah,
Irish. I thought so. Yeah.
I've been here forever.
It's an institution, isn't it, Scots?
It is, yeah. Well, it does a few things very well,
In particular, seafood, which I admitted to you slightly cautiously over email, I'm not a huge fan of, and you responded with an email in all caps. You don't eat seafood?
I just always find it staggering when people over the age of 13 claim they don't eat certain things.
This is fair. I'm really not fussy. As you know, I wouldn't have launched a podcast in which I go to restaurants if I was fussy with food. But as I think I described to you, something about the insectile appearance of a lot of seafood, crabs, lobsters, etc. For me, that doesn't make me think, I want to take a bite out of you. I'm obviously in a minority, though. Let's talk about your latest book, John, your 11th novel, The Fathers, which I just finished reading over the weekend. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It really fucked up my Monday, actually, that novel, reading the chapter, which, without giving away any spoilers, is the saddest turning point in the plot for the main character, one of the main characters, Dan Chambers, and his wife, Grace. And I couldn't really stop thinking about it for the entire day. So that was Monday squared. Just took all the blues and made them much, much worse. So thanks for that.
Sorry for that. Sorry about that, Jack.
But it is both a sad and incredibly funny, as many of your novels are, incredibly funny, with flecks of anger everywhere. I've learnt a lot of Glaswegian slang in the course of reading this book. Is this book, would you say, in part, a love letter to Glasgow?
In part, definitely, yeah. The Welsh have an expression called the hiraeth, which means as you get older, certainly as you get into your 50s, a sort of nostalgia, a longing for the place you come from. And so some years back, I bought a house in Ayrshire. So we're up there a lot on the coast, so I play a lot of golf, but I do miss Glasgow specifically too. I had been trying to convince my wife to move back to Glasgow in the last sort of 3 or 4 years. I'd sort of convinced her to go and look at a few houses, and we'd been looking in the West End. So I'd been spending a bit of time in the West End. I'd forgotten that if you take a 5-minute walk from Hindland, where there's all these beautiful big Victorian townhouses, within 5 minutes you're kind of in Partick, which is much more rough and ready, So that idea, and stuck in my head of kind of a novel where two guys from these very different Glasgows was kind of forced to rub along for some reason.
Those guys, Dan Chambers, who we've already mentioned, and Jada Hamilton.
Yeah. So and then that was kind of all I had for a while. And then the other instant, which I'll allude to because I don't want to know spoilers because it's quite a big one in the novel, but my daughter, who's now 7, when she was about 2, 18 months maybe, nearly choked to death on a flat peach stone, which is completely my fault. I was eating a flat peach and she wanted a bite, and I sort of let her take a bite, and I was reading the Sunday papers and wasn't really paying attention, and before I knew it, she'd snarfled half of it, including the stone, which promptly stuck in her windpipe, and there was maybe 50, I guess it was no more than 15 seconds before she managed to swallow it. But there was 15 seconds where she was panicking and she clearly couldn't breathe. And I remember just this jet of panic and terror, It was 15 seconds, but it felt like a month, of just horror. And thankfully, as I say, she swallowed it, but it was such a searing moment of pure terror that once the adrenaline had burned off and I'd got over it, I knew that one day that moment was going to work itself into my fiction somehow.
Wow.
It normally takes a few years until the experience distills down enough for you to write about with some detachment. So sure enough, a few years later, there we were. We kind of, I knew that the idea, like, how could I get these two guys together on the book? So we'd normally never meet in the course of their daily lives. And it became the idea that, why the great leveller in this country is the NHS, you know? And so, Dan Chambers, the novel, is very successful and certainly has the money to go privately, but he's a bit of an old school Scottish socialist type who wouldn't do that. So him and his wife, the compromise is they have their kid in the National Health, but they manage to pay for a private room at the hospital. And it's in front of the maternity ward that he meets Jada, who's he's celebrating the birth of his 5th or 6th child. He's not quite sure. There's 5 or 6 mums involved, certainly. And they get talking. And so these two guys who kind of normally would never be in each other's lives wind up being in each other's lives.
You mentioned there the two characters whose paths cross from two sides of the track in Glasgow. This is quite an Amesian novel, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean,
let's just talk very briefly about that. I don't want to mix my colour palette too much here in terms of shows that I produce. But again, Amos did it back in the day in Notting Hill, not far from where we're sitting now, where he would take two guys, one from the sort of townhouse chic end of Notting Hill, and one from the sort of crumbling council block, which I lived in Notting Hill in the 1995. I moved to Notting Hill. I think it was a year after the information came out. And I remember being amazed that there were still really rough pubs around there, and sort of, round about All Saints Road, Lancaster, areas streets you wouldn't want to go down after dark. Of course, that's all gone now. It's all massively changed. So that was another reason to set the book in Glasgow, because I thought you still do have those kind of, different communities existing quite close together in Glasgow. But yeah, the influence of Amos, where you take in London Fields and you'd have Guy and Nicholas, all these characters rubbing along in that area, or in the information, you have similar setup. Well, putting London Fields to one side, then the Glaswegian element of this. Where do you find the comic elements from things which to most Glaswegians are just part of the scenery?
I guess I haven't lived there for a long time, so you kind of come back with a fresh comic eye. And I love making things up like that are kind of close enough to the reality, but it's more the kind of shops that Jada supplies with knockoff booze, So Jada, the first couple of people to read the book, thankfully, the first feedback I got was from my agent George. He says, "Oh my God, Jada's a comic creation for the ages,"
Absolutely.
Because those guys, they're always, poor Dan. Dan's pretty much the straight man for a lot of the novel to Jada. Jada's just a lot more fun, And to give you an insight into kind of how books are written, sometimes when you start falling for a character, I started looking for reasons to, as I was getting into the third draft of the book, for reasons just to give Jada a little more fun to do. For instance, the scene in the pub where Jada beats the shit out of Edinburgh sort of rugby pawns type, that came quite late in the book. It was just like wanting to give Jada a bit more fun and games,
And that's the thing, I found myself becoming very warm towards Jada and more interested in everything he did versus everything that Dan did. I suppose because Dan is more familiar.
You and I run across Dan's everyday lives.
Right, exactly. Media...
Media successful,
yes, that's right.
Middle-class policies.
He's a writer for a very successful crime series called McAllister.
Here's an interesting thing that kind of happens through the novel, though. These guys there's a parabola where they cross paths, where they cross trajectories in a way. Because Dan, there's always a suspicion for Dan that he kind of sold his talent out, what little talent he had. He came up with a very successful but sort of bland crime show, which has now been running for a long, long time. And has became his life's work. And he knows that it's perhaps not the highest quality offering. It's one for the housewives sort of thing, and the grannies. And he's wanting to kill it off. And maybe do work he feels more equal to his real talent. He's not quite sure what that is yet. He's kind of thinking he might write a novel. But the problem for Dan is he hasn't really got anything to write about, because he sold this show pretty much straight out of university, and then by the time he was 30, was quite wealthy and successful, and has remained so. So what do you write about? Art comes from struggle and grief. And then here comes Jada, and here comes these events in his life where he does end up, the price is horrific, but he does end up, you suspect that if the book went on, Dan was actually going to set about writing a pretty powerful, if not harrowing, novel or movie, With Jada also, it was important that I didn't want Jada just to be a caricature or a cartoon. Also, beware the writer who comes heavy with the backstory. So it was a case of just giving Jada a few moments to breathe throughout the novel, where you kind of got a wee insight into how Jada was parented and how Jada was brought up. And, the fact that he's a functioning parent of any kind at all is a sort of miracle, given where he's come from,
Did you know Jada Hamilton? Have you met Jada Hamilton?
Jada. Yeah. I mean, not to put too fine a point in it, had I kind of not discovered reading and books, my school was full of Jadas. And if fate had taken a slightly different wobble, I could have been a Jada. My brother was a Jada, up to a point. And yeah, a lot of that, I would say there's maybe only a small handful of me and my friends from school who weren't Jadas. There was more Jadas, a lot more Jadas than Dans at my school.
As we've already kind of alluded to, Dan is a successful careerist, very, very wealthy, however, has struggled to have kids, has gone through, I think, 7 rounds of IVF before they eventually have their son, Tom. And they meet in the hospital, he and Jada, where very quickly he susses out who Jada is and vice versa, really. But Jada smokes, drinks, has umpteen number of kids by so many women he can barely keep count. And in terms of fatherhood, the main theme of this novel doesn't really place much value or have much of a sense of what it means to be a father. Meanwhile, Dan's running around in a constant state of low-lying anxiety and panic about getting everything wrong. What did you want to convey about fatherhood in The Fathers through these characters?
I guess one of the points is making about class is that it often strikes me that the people who have the least fun in this country are the middle classes, because it's all about kind of responsibility, and people who have a lot of fucking fun are the very upper classes and the very low classes. They don't have to care. They in both ways, they live in consequence-free environments. Jada doesn't care if his bunch of kids outside wedlock. Who cares? Somebody else is going to pick that slack up. Similarly, if you're very rich, you don't have to care about that.
You're a music connoisseur, and you must have read Marquis Smith's autobiography, Renegade.
Of course.
In that, he says exactly that. The working class and the upper class, they're all right. The ones you want to be suspicious of are the middle classes.
Middle classes, yeah.
Because they have a suspicious need for control.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I find myself firmly stuck in that bracket myself. What I want to say, it wasn't so much that I came armed with I want to say all these things about fatherhood, although I did want to write about, there's quite a lot from Dan's POV about those sort of holy, sort of sacred moments when you have your father to a very small child, the very deep instinct to protect and to nurture, which of course Dan fails in spectacularly, or he feels in spectacularly. So, I wanted to dive into that because there's a lot of, whether it's Rachel Cusk or there's a lot of books from the women's perspective about those sort of, but I didn't see a huge amount about dads writing about the kind of joy of early fatherhood. So I wanted to put on, and Dan's in a position where he has to work away from home a lot and he's missing the kid and he gets home and and that was also an essential thing for the contrast of these two characters, that Dan and Gracie's child was so wanted and so desired, and that they spend such a long time and so much money trying to have him. Whereas with Jada, it was like falling off a log. He only has to look at it. I think he phrases it more memorably himself in the novel than his own sort of sexual prowess. I can't remember how he does it, but it's a fairly distasteful image, I'm sure. And it's funny because the book tour starts on Saturday the 12th of July in Irvine, Ayrshire, my hometown. And already, of course, I'm sort of just preparing readings for it, and I'm already that sort of sense that, oh God, it's really got to be all Jada all night. And I'm one of my terrible weaknesses, I like to make him laugh. As you know, Jack, you've experienced my sickening playing to the crowds, playing to the cheap seats.
I was laughing all the way throughout, and as I think I told you, I was laughing from the very first few pages, which, to be fair to Dan, were all about him and his internal thoughts when he and Grace are trying fiercely to have this child. Gradually, Dan had come to hate anyone who managed the most natural thing in the world, with complete ease, seemingly without planning, preparation, or any thought whatsoever. The smugness with which your friends would announce, "Hey, we're pregnant," made him want to turn and walk away, or just tell them to go fuck themselves. Dan remembers standing with Jack and Bob at a party, both of them knocking back the whiskies while they bragged about the ease, literally within hours of making the decision to start a family, with which their partners had been knocked up. Dan had stood there, clutching his tumbler of orange juice with a rictus grin on his face, all the while dreaming about taking them both out the back and standing on their fucking heads. I mean, this is the tone that you can expect from a Niven novel anyway, but I think now, looking back, actually, gives us a sense in which Dan has a calm exterior and a very civil manner about him, but there's already darkness lurking within the character that comes out later when things really go south for him. Perhaps you can give us a reading from the novel.
So the scene I was going to read is brief. It's early in the book, page 40ish, when we're still in the hospital and Nicola, Jada's much younger partner, has been given a leaflet by the doctor about the idea of after you've had a baby and you have to sort of at some point resume your sex life. And we've already probably intuited at this point that Jada isn't the most sensitive partner in this regard. Nicola opened the leaflet and began to read slowly, her lips softly moving. Under the section headed Going Home with Baby, there was a subsection titled Baby's Health, and then beneath that, Smoking. Nicola read on for a bit. Jada scrolled on his phone. Jada says here we shouldn't smoke round the wane. Aye, well, I'm not going to smoke right in his coopin', am I? No, but it says we shouldn't smoke in the house. Aye, in another room, but... No, it says here, second-hand smoke is harmful for you and your baby. Nicola read on haltingly. Chemicals linger in the air and can still be in the room 5 hours later. Opening windows or smoking in another room or out of a window won't help. Oh, geez, peace with that shite, Nicola. When your baby is born and you bring them home, ask anyone who cares for them to smoke outside or stop completely. Fucking don't talk pish outside. It's fucking January, for fuck's sake. The baby woke with a start, crying. Shh, fuck's sake, Jada, you've woke the Wayne up. You should read this. She picked up the baby and cradled him with her left arm, soothing him. I wait to fuck. I've enough fucking pish to listen to. Look, Nicola, I've had a few ways, right? I've smoked all my days. They're all fine, eh? Nicola paused to consider this. The proposition that Jada's kids were all fine was certainly open to debate, but she chose not to pursue this. She turned the page with her thumb and read on as Jada stood up and stretched. Anyway, all this shite's not going to put food on the table, is it? I need to get back to work. Jada, mind you make sure you put the wains caught up before you come and get us tomorrow. Aye, aye. Nicola's eye had moved on to a section of the leaflet titled Returning to Intimacy. Sex may be difficult or painful after giving birth. If you don't feel like sex, you can find other ways of being intimate. Try lots of warm physical contact that doesn't have to lead to sex. This was obviously not a sentence or indeed a concept too much trouble Jada with. She modulated it. Jada says here we have to be careful for a wee while. In bed like. Jada picked up on her euphemism and tact. He respected it. Mentally he thanked her for it. He tenderly cupped her face. Don't worry, doll. No my first rodeo. Just means your dung funnel's going to take a pounding for a wee while. He turned back to Caden/Jaden. See you later, wee man. He ruffled the baby's hair and left. Nicola watched him go, shouldering his way across the ward with that swagger he had, his nightmarish promise of vigorous anal sex ringing in her ears.
Nicola is a story of last-minute triumph, let's just put it that way. And you only realise, I only realised by the end, how much I ought to have been rooting for her the whole time. We were talking about class just then. It's very easy to make fun of the middle classes. Do you find it tricky to be funny about the working classes without seeming to ridicule them?
That's not a... I mean, I still... as stupid as it may sound sitting in Scots and Mayfair, I still feel working class. I came from... my father was an electrician, my mother was a cleaner. I grew up in a 2-bedroom council house in a Scottish council estate. that never kind of leaves you. So it's not like I certainly still feel in my bones more working class than middle class.
Is that why you'd like to move back to Glasgow?
No. That's got nothing to do with that. That's just I love the city, and I'm quite fancy a nice big townhouse in the West End. No mortgage. I guess as you get to my age, one starts to think in terms of slimming down one's responsibilities rather than increasing them. But also, I've lived quite a profligate life. You know, I've had 4 children by 3 different women, and I love them all dearly, and I'm very fortunate in that I'm on great terms with all of my exes. But you know, there's a fairly chunky price tag that comes with that sort of behaviour, and I quite like to live well too. So it's, you know, we have to work fairly hard. So I guess the Glasgow thing was part of a sort of a slight economy drive. On my part, I was thinking, well, we could sell up. Been down south for 25 years, we could sell up, and you know. But yeah, the weather is a thing. Yeah, Jack, what can I tell you?
Well, fatherhood's price tag is certainly another theme of this book. Do you know what you'd like to order from Scott's? Is it ludicrously basic of me to want to know what the Great Scott's fish and chips is like?
Not at all. If that's what you want to do, go down that road, mate. Could we have half a dozen of the Lindisfarne rocks to start, and the zucchini flowers we're going to share, and then you want the deep fried haddock?
That's right, thank you.
And I'll have the 16-ounce Dover sole menu. Fantastic, thank you.
You were talking to me, John, about the increasing sense you have that literacy, particularly among male readers, where it's been shown to decline, leaves you feeling uncertain about the future of your trade. Do you worry that it's not going to reach its audience in the future? Do you worry that it's maybe not even reaching its audience now in the way you intended?
I do worry that sometimes as a male novelist working where I am, at the time and place I am, that you're writing for an increasingly diminishing audience that might not even be there in a decade. Because as we know, women buy, I couldn't give you the stat, but they hugely outbuy men when it comes to fiction. Men tend to read non-fiction, they read history, they read biography. Women read novels. And as a male novelist, it's kind of terrifying where that might leave you in a little while.
Do you have any theories as to why this is?
I think we lost a lot of younger men to the internet and to gaming and to, you know, the problem, when Kill Your Friends came out, I met a lot of parents on reading tours and at dinner parties who said, oh, thank you. My son's reading your novel. I cannot remember the last time he read a novel. Because a lot of guys who are either musicians or in bands, they felt they had to read Kill Your Friends. So it was one of those, I'm not going to say the last novel, but it was one of those few novels by a male writer, young, I say not that young, but I was youngish at the time, that seemed to punch through and find an audience of male readers.
You wrote Kill Your Friends in
2006, published
in it.
What, of course, as we know, what the novel teaches you is empathy. Especially a first-person novel like Kill Your Friends teaches you how to live, it forces you to live in someone else's skin for however long it takes. I'm not claiming any kinship with Catch in the Rye or whatever, but I know there's a certain kind of novel that appeals to young men. It can teach them to speak a language, which if you learn it at the right age, you never forget. And I worry that that's getting lost. And with that goes empathy. And you'll end up in the road that's kind of portrayed brilliantly in something like Adolescence, where that's a world of characters, young men without empathy, who are just lost in this black hole of online, and fellow machismo, not knowing what it is to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, which is what novels do. So how do I address that? I don't completely know.
Would you feel disappointed if the majority of people who come up to you saying that they loved reading this novel for the very reasons you've mentioned there were women? Would you hope that this would be picked up by a lot of men?
Frankly, I'll take the sales wherever I can get them.
Yeah, there's always that, yes.
But it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's I remember reading an interview with Noel Gallagher some years back. We're speaking here in the week of the Oasis Reformation. And I've hung out with Noel a couple of times, and he famously said that he doesn't read fiction, you know? And somebody said to him, he said the kind of thing that the guy in the movie Sideways says, somebody's made it all up, who cares? Why do you care? And so I said, well, you like film, you like movies, though? And they went, yeah. And they're like, well, you know, somebody makes that up. They went, man, it's different. Like a book. I'm like, okay. But I don't think that view to you or I may seem insane and barbaric and clueless, but I don't think it's that uncommon.
Male literacy, of course, comes up in the book.
Uh-huh.
Let's not forget. Dan discovers that Jada has a bit of a literacy problem, and it's a very tender moment between the two fathers, isn't it?
Yeah. He finds out from, you know, spending more time with Jada that he's illiterate and teaches him to read. And this has sort of bigger repercussions later in the novel. Again, no spoilers, but part of the thing is that Dan thinks Jada's life is very much the unexamined life. There's no self-analysis there, or he's just a sort of wrecking machine of crime and, you know, neglect. And then in the denouement of the book, Dan realises that Jada, that the unexamined life is actually being examined, and he doesn't like what he sees, Jada, and he sort of gains a lot of humanity in Dan's eyes when that moment happens.
It would be easy to imagine Jada as being just consistent throughout the book. Thank you. Consistently Jada Hamilton, never really having a moment to reflect on who he is and how he's lived. But in fact, both men have interesting trajectories throughout. The oysters have arrived.
Can I just say that I'm staggered that the man who said I don't really like seafood is happily splitting some oysters. That's fantastic.
I came round in the end. Just don't judge the way I eat mine, because you're clearly more practiced at this than I am. Yes, please. Last time I had oysters, I think, was at Borough Market, but it was years ago.
Calling small business owners, tired of feeling invisible online? Meet Total Solutions, your modern-day Yellow Pages reimagined for the digital age. Whether you're a service provider looking for more clients or someone searching for the right pro to get the job done, Total Solutions connects local businesses with local people. You can list your services, network with other business owners, or even post jobs if you're the one looking for help. Ready to grow your business or find the next go-to expert? Head to totalsolutions.com to join the community. That's totalsolutions.com.
What did you make of your Dover Sole, John?
Very good, but that's a well worn route for me. I knew what was coming.
And it was as good as ever?
Same as it ever was, yeah. Very good.
I believe there's another reading from the novel that you said you wanted to give us.
Yeah, I thought we had a bit of Jada earlier, and Jada is, as I said to you, preparing the sort of the readings for the book tour, which starts next week, and it's kind of Jada heavy because he's funnier, to put it bluntly. And, you know, writers have been discovering this since Milton wrote Satan in Paradise Lost, and the bad guys are always more fun. But Dan has his fun moments too. So there's a moment here where Dan is he's out, he's buying some fish for dinner, and he's got a half hour to kill. He's got a new baby. He's full of the joy of life, and he goes for a few glasses of wine while he kills, you know, a couple of drinks while he's killing half an hour. And of course, he was a student in Glasgow himself, and if you know Glasgow, the ubiquitous chip where he's sitting, it looks onto Ashton Lane, which connects the university to Byres Road, so it's all just a thoroughfare of students. And so Dan's sort of sitting looking at this, you know, as he drinks his wine. Dan felt himself growing expansive, poetic even, as the wine tumbled through his veins, getting to work on his empty stomach, as he watched the darkness falling. Many of the students were looking at their phones as they walked, the bright screens lighting up beneath the thin, colourful nylon of their umbrellas, reds and greens and yellows glowing like lanterns. Of course, the students were different from back in his day. Today, some of the girls looked like boys, and some of the boys looked like girls. The spindly-legged one in the miniskirt, teetering heels and bob, with the Adam's apple like a fist and thick 5 o'clock shadow. The huge, broad-shouldered bruiser with short hair plastered to her skull and heaving tits strapped down. Dan recalled that his friend Ali's 17-year-old daughter had recently told him that out of her 10 closest friends, 2 were bisexual, 3 were gay, 1 was non-binary, and 2 were transitioning. 8 out of 10. When Dan was 17, they had Poofy Colin, the one gay guy in the whole school of 900. Did this simply represent the way it was really meant to be? Was human sexuality always this diffuse and polyamorous, but it never had the courage to speak its many names so loudly? Or did it just represent another escalation in the never-ending rebel war youth wages on age? Dan remembered an incident from his own teens, when his father had wandered into the living room where Dan and his mates were watching a video of the New York Dolls. His dad had stared slack-jawed at the screen for a few seconds, numb at the sight of David Johansen and Johnny Thunders slathered in makeup and women's blouses as they tottered in stack heels, caterwauling their way through Jetboy. Eventually his dad, born in 1938, had managed a stunned Jesus Christ before he backed out of the room, terrified and appalled. The boys had laughed, and Dan remembered thinking something like, wow, what are our kids going to have to do to shock us? Here it was then. Dad, I'm a bloke. Or, Dad, I'm a bird. Because you couldn't really do much with the traditional tools of rebellion these days, could you? Bands? Who cared? Your dad liked the New York Dolls too. Tattoos? Yeah, right. Everyone has tattoos. Your gran's got a tattoo. Haircuts? No chance. Everyone has a mad haircut now. When Dan was at university, there was one barber in the West End. Now every other shop was a barber, all queued out of the door from dawn till dusk, as the kids obtained and maintained their elaborate Premiership football-inspired rugs. The day was fast approaching, Dan reflected, when the High Court judge would saunter into the chamber with love and hate tattooed upon the knuckles of his, her, their hands, and the dotted cut hairline inked around his, her, their throat. Pausing only to smooth out a full Mohican, he, she, they would rap the gavel to bring the court to order. No, it seemed that for true rebellion these days, you really did have to go with, I'm getting my cock chopped off. Or, I'm having a cock grafted on. And forget Ali's daughter's friends, there was Bob's nephew, Gordon. Gordon was a furry, only fully comfortable when dressed as a cat. Or there was Andy, the 18-year-old cousin of Debbie from the office. Andy was now Andrea, having been taking the pills and growing breasts since she was 15. She was scheduled to have her penis removed this summer. She was now in a relationship with James, who used to be Janet, who had also been taking the pills since he was 16. The operation to remove his breasts and turn his vagina into a penis was scheduled for September, at which point surely someone was finally getting pumped. It seemed a hard, circuitous road though, and Dan found himself wondering what might be afoot when Tom was that age, about 15 years from now. Maybe everybody would be having everything removed by then, just a nation of action men groins dressed up as animals in, say, full Nazi uniform, all cybersexing each other in the metaverse. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. True, Will, true. There was more right now in Ashton fucking Lane than Dan had ever dreamt of in his philosophy. What do I know? God love you all. He raised his glass and toasted them through the window.
Perhaps a very relatable passage for modern fathers these days. I've noticed, John, that throughout this interview, there is a sports car parked, as you'd expect in Mayfair, right on the curb here. And as people have walked past, the men have generally been looking at the sports car and the women have been looking at us, which I think says everything about the differences in interest when it comes to literature between the sexes.
The women are probably figuring that we own that sports car. That's our car. We're sitting right next to it.
Okay, so John, I thought we would end this episode with something of a little game around Glaswegian slang. There's a lot of Glaswegian slang in the novel itself. I'm going to read out the slang in my best Glaswegian accent, and you're going to tell me what it means in English.
Okay.
Baffies.
Baffies are slippers.
Brief.
Brief is a lawyer.
Oh, it says here it's a car.
Oh, it can be a car too. Brief is also a car. Sorry, Cooper. Car and a lawyer.
If it's chunkin' outside.
Chanking is cold.
You mentioned this one earlier. I enjoyed this. Although I'd really love to know the origin. A coupon.
Coupon is a face.
Do you know where it comes from, that word for face?
I don't actually.
I don't. I'm asking you.
I couldn't go etymology in that.
Another part of the anatomy. Jeggy.
A what?
Is it a geggy or jeggy?
Jeggy.
Geggy.
G-E-W, geggy. Geggies would be glasses.
It says here it's a mouth.
Oh, as in shut your geggy. Yeah, that's the mouth, yeah. Sorry. But you would only ever hear it in the context of shut your geggy.
To get sent to the messages.
Sent for the messages means you're going for the shopping.
Mince.
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 Mince is mince. Beef.
M-I-N-C. It says here it means rubbish.
Oh, sorry, if you're talking mince.
Yeah. I should put this in more of a context, shouldn't I?
No, if you said to Scottish, but mince would mean mince. But you're talking pure mince.
A piece.
A piece is a sandwich.
That's right. A cheese and onion piece. This one threw me. It's going to make me sound like Elmer Fudd. Wabbit.
Wabbit.
Wabbit. W-A-B-B-I-T.
I don't know.
Apparently this is tired. To be tired is to be wabbit.
I've never... Where did you get that from?
This is all Googled, but these are getting increasingly dubious.
I've never heard that. Crabbit. There's a crabbit.
Crabbit.
C-R-A-B-B-I-T.
Yeah.
Which means look sort of grumpy.
Moving on. A Ouija.
A Ouija is someone from Glasgow.
And then finally, there's a sentence here, right? So here we go. Thought we'd leave it on the theme of the book. To shout at someone, you da sells Avon.
Your da sells Avon. I haven't actually ever had cause to use that one, but imagine it's your dad's effeminate.
It says here, literally, your father belongs to a multi-level marketing company that sells cosmetics. A stock phrase that insults and emasculates the addressee's father.
That's fairly on the nose.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, John. Thank you very much for joining me on the Booking Club at Scott's.
My pleasure. Thank you.